Hello, I'm Holly Ittle. I'm the exhibitions director here at the Dairy Barn Art Center, and today we are talking with two more artists featured in OH+5 contemporary art of our region. We are speaking with Craig Fisher and Sue Cortese. The exhibition is on view now at the Dairy Barn Art Center through March 13th, and you can find more information at dairybarn.org. Good morning, Sue. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Sue Cortese. I'm from Holland, Michigan. I am a fiber artist or a quilt maker. I've been doing that for 25 plus years. Started off doing traditional quilts and have moved into the art quilts. I have always dyed my own fabric, but have gotten into printing on cloth and lately doing shibori and indigo work. Besides making quilts, I also teach, I long arm for other people, and I'm also a certified quilt judge.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Sue. Nice to meet you. Hi, Craig. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Craig Fisher. I'm a resident of Toledo, Ohio. I've been here most of my life. I am recently retired, but I've been doing intaglio printmaking pretty much from the time I graduated from the university in the 70s. So for me, it's always been an interest that I figured that if I really was sincere about, I needed to buy a press and do it. So I don't come from an academic background as much as I'm an independent artist working from my home. So I've enjoyed working a lot with not just prints, but I do a lot of oil and acrylic painting as well.
Great. So I'm going to step out and let the two of you have a conversation about your artwork and studio practice.
Thanks.
Yeah. I'm looking at your studio in the back there. You look like you've got a complex series of machines that probably go and help you take in and work your textile elements together. Am I correct here?
Yes, I have a large assortment of equipment in my studio, and it's quite full. We built the house about 3 years ago now, and it was funny because the people who were building it kept seeing this large space that was, you know, kind of empty. I had some shelves built in, as you can see, but the floor was concrete, and they kept all thinking, oh, this would make a great garage or a wood studio. And when they found out I was a quilt maker and that I was putting sewing machines in here, they kind of went, she's never going to fill that space. And one of the contractors came back afterwards to do some minor fixes. And he goes, oh my God, I didn't think you'd be able to fill this space. I couldn't believe when somebody told me you had a 14-foot sewing machine. So, yeah, I've been at it for a long time and have accumulated a good number of things. You can see my long arm off over to my one side, which is 14 feet long and about four to 6 feet, depending on where the sewing machine is, wide. And that allows me to put a large piece on the quilt and move the sewing machine as I'm sewing, as opposed to on a traditional home sewing machine, you have to move this large quilt under the head of a sewing machine that's only, you know, so big. And to get a large piece under there can be challenging. So having the long arm does give me an advantage there. And I have several home machines that I piece on. And then I have, to my left, I have a dye studio. So it's a wet studio where I do the shibori in the indigo dyeing. And I also use MX fiber reactive dyes. And I have a Thermofax screen print machine to make screens to print from and all that fun stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Now, have you, you talk about working with dyes, and some of them are natural. Obviously, indigo goes back a long ways.
Yes.
Have you worked with like logwood and some of the more natural dyes, or you to get into chemical dyes that are current?
I mostly work with chemical dyes. Indigo is really the only natural dye that I've worked with. I've started looking into some other dyes, but the process is a little different and the chemicals are different. And believe it or not, I feel safer using the chemical dyes than I do the natural dyes, because the mordants you have to use with natural dyes are a little more potent, and you have to wear a respirator when you're using them and things like that. So I feel more comfortable with my chemical dyes, but the indigo, other than for a quick time period, and you can use it outside, so I don't feel like I'm damaging my lungs at all. So that's the nice thing. And I do use a chemical vat when I do my indigo. So it's, again, I'm not necessarily having to use the heavy chemicals. So
when you start a project, do you have kind of a notion in your head as to the direction it's going to take, or is it more organic and flowing? I mean, you like work out with a sketch and you know whether you're going to create something of a particular size?
most of the work that I've done previously, I was just working organically, trying to create different sizes and configurations with the work that I was doing. Going forward, I'm going to do more sketch work to plan out pieces more. I've only been doing the shibori for about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. So I was still getting used to how to work with it and how to plan it. And so now that I've gotten the technique a little bit better under my belt, I feel like I can plan things more and move forward a little bit with purpose, I guess would be the right way to say that.
Yeah, I had just a few minutes before we started conversation, but I noticed that on a quick search, you were a recipient of the ArtPrize in Grand Rapids. Am I correct in that?
I was one of the many people who had work in the show. I didn't win any prizes or any of that stuff. I just have had work in ArtPrize, which is a very nice thing to be included in.
Yeah, it's kind of in your backyard too, in a way.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it does get a lot of press. Yeah.
It does. And the thing with ArtPrize is it is hard to find. Most of my pieces have been quite large, 7 foot, 8 foot big pieces, and to try and find a venue that's large enough to have something like that isn't going to be around food, because a lot of the venues in ArtPrize are in restaurants and are open to close to the public. And so with the fiber, everybody sees it and wants to touch it. I mean, that's the first thing they do when they see a fiber piece, is they reach for it. And unfortunately, it's not under glass like a print or a painting would be. So with the public handling it, it can get damaged or dirty. So you have to find the right fit. And so locations with ArtPrize can be a little tricky.
Yeah.
But there have been a number of great people who have had fiber pieces in ArtPrize. So
Yeah. Is there I know there's a big community, especially in textile arts, but do you find inspiration by working with a particular, in a gallery sense, or working individually with other people who might be part of that broader community?
I tend to work by myself, but I do like to, I am part of a broader community, and I do draw inspiration from being around them. More, I get energized from being around them. So I do enjoy going and taking classes with these folks and staying in touch with them and seeing the work in shows. So it is a sense of both. I stay connected with a community, and I belong to several communities within the quilt world. I've got the group of judges that I work with. I have the group of artists that I create with. And then there are the traditional quilters that I stay in touch with, especially with my long arm quilting. So, yeah. How about you? Do you find yourself working within a community?
Well, and no, I think for most of us, especially in the Midwest, now I'm only speaking for myself maybe, but all art is local, you know, especially when the pandemic hits, you know, and as much as you would like to reach out, I think, to a broader national audience, I think you get more for your bang for your buck by, I guess, working within the confines of, I would say, the 200 to 300 mile radius of where you live, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true with me. I mean, I'm doing some galleries down in Dayton. I've been in some galleries up in South Haven, Michigan,
Okay.
and up in Saugatuck, and so it's like, and in Indiana. So, but I don't think I've got really pushed out beyond that. But one thing I do miss is just working with, I think, other artists sometimes in a collective, you know, because you have a tendency to bounce ideas off and techniques. I mean, just like working in with quilts and textile arts, I think there's a lot of process involved. And, you know, as you work, you really realize that there are so many ways to approach a creative solution when you're dealing with something, and you can become very insular. And I think it's, especially if you're working by yourself. So it's always good to have, I think, a larger group of people to work with. I'm hoping that as the pandemic winds down now, that may not be such a challenge, hopefully, going forward.
Yeah, I very much agree with you on that. I have kind of stayed insulated myself during this time period, and have brought one or two people into my studio at a time, and, you know, masked up and everything else. But it would be nice to be able to be in a broader group again and not worry
Yes.
about ramifications of that. What are you currently working on?
I'm working on actually a print that's a combination of woodblock printing, Japanese mokuhanga, which is a woodblock print process, and uses mulberry paper and kozo paper, and then marrying that into the intaglio print process, which because within a lot of etchings and engravings are very black and white, and it's often hard to get color into it. I mean, intaglio ink colors have a tendency to be, I wouldn't say dull, but not as vibrant as screen printing or some other process. So there's a way to integrate color in there and do it, I would say, with a certain amount of economy. And when I'm working with woodblock prints, I don't have anything here I could probably grab, but it's like, it gives you the ability to print it on paper and then simply using wheat paste to sandwich it to the surface of a carrier sheet, which can be a high quality rag paper, and run it through the press. And then what you have is essentially color that's on top of, underneath the actual etching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's been, I applied for a grant from the Artists with Disabilities at the Ohio Arts Council, and was able to basically afford to get some of the more expensive Japanese papers, which, because they're made out of kozo, they're a natural product. They're expensive. They're just made, and you can only find them in a few prefectures in Japan that will work with the water-based ink when they're rubbed down. So it's there are some machine-made options, but they're not as nice, you know.
Right, right. Does the quality of the paper add to your work, add to the prints?
The quality of the paper does, yes. Just the absorbency factor. I'm working in a basement and the humidity is pretty constant. There are people who work in areas that, where their studios may be in a dry climate and moisture wicks out of the paper very fast. So because it's a natural product, you have to kind of keep it at a consistent level so that each print, every print you pull, it looks like every other print. So the idea behind printmaking is to create multiples that are identical. Now that process has kind of, in some ways, fallen by the wayside with the development and acceptance of monoprints and some digital prints, but as there's still my generation, which I would consider the boomer generation, were brought up on a lot of I would call traditional printmaking techniques that are often wetted in toxic chemicals and acids. And so I do a lot of my etching in my garage using a ferric chloride bath, whereas normally when I was taught in school, we'd be using nitric acid or Dutch Morden, to etch the copper.
Okay.
So now we're trying to get away from that. A lot of the inks are not just oil-based, but can be water-based and offer you options where you're not dealing with areas where you got to wear a mask all the way around.
Right, right.
So.
Let's see what other questions she's got here for us. What problems did you solve when creating your work that is in the show?
Well, the work that I was doing, I tried to get color in it without having to resort to 2 sheets of copper. The size of the print's 18 by 24. Economically, that shouldn't be an issue, but it has become because copper prices, a plate that's 18 by 24 is about over $100 now. Right. So if you want to add another color, you'd be eating that much in just copper, which is not just wasteful, but I think there are, like I said, I'm using the Japanese print process gave me options that way. But with this print, I had to print the color down, roll it through my press, and then wipe the plate clean, put another color down while the paper's still in the press, and then as it's pressing through, transfer that new color. So I went through the press twice. So it was a registration issue,
Right. Yeah.
You're like dealing with quilts, you don't have enough arms, I'm sure.
Right. I was going to say, even with printing on cloth with a Thermofax screen, getting the screen, if you do 2 layers, lining that back up again is a monumental task, and getting things to go where you want them to. Because I know with my thickened dyes, or if I use paint, they go through and they bleed and they don't stay where they're supposed to. And so I'm sure there are a bunch of tricks that you have to know in order to get a good print.
Yes. I think that there's something you could learn a little bit. The only thing I wish I had more knowledge of was working on photosensitive plates that you can take a negative and put it on the plate and expose it to light, and then you create essentially a high contrast image, similar to almost to screen printing,
Right.
And I haven't had the room or resources to expand into those areas, but that's the one thing you might find in a co-op that you may not have at home, or there may be a number of people who are sharing knowledge in that area and have the equipment there, and you don't have to stuff it into your studio,
Exactly. One more thing to buy and find a place for.
Yeah. I did run across a textile issue when I was doing just recently. I do a lot of oil painting, but I've been doing a lot of reproductions of Civil War battle flags, and they're done on 100% silk, and I've had to dye the silk, and then I go in and try and paint. Well, these flags were painted on both sides of the of the flag, but they had to be pitted thin enough so that they would flow in the wind, you know. And
Right.
a lot of what I was trying to do is find the right kind of paint that I could paint the silk and not load it up with medium or I would say, you know, just pigment for that matter.
Right.
So what I've been trying to do is build dye walls on the silk so that you could put the color in and not wick into the rest of the fabric, you know.
Right.
So that is a whole art into itself. I was surprised to see that there's people doing that.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, in each person you talk to will have a different trick or tip in how to do that. And it's all a matter of finding what works for you and your process. I have not done a lot of painting on silk, so unfortunately I can't give you tips. But I have worked with silk and doing my shibori, and I have done some scarves in silk that with acid dyes, but then again, that's folding it and submerging the whole thing into an dye bath. And so it's not trying to keep pigment in one specific spot. But I know that there are people who do that, and I would tell you to take a look at the Pro Chemical website or Dharma Trading website. Both of them are very good with sharing information, and both would have the supplies that you would need to do painting on silk. And I know you have to stretch the silk on a frame in order to paint it. But that's as far as my knowledge goes on that technique. So yeah. I got a great respect for working on fabric, just you know, from that experience alone. But yeah.
Do you when you're doing work, I noticed some of the pieces seem to have a tactile quality, like they're almost like a puff print. Is that, are you working at batting or something to kind of create dimension?
Yes, I tend to use a wool batting, and so where I don't put heavy stitching, the batting will create a dimension in the work, and that's just a preference of mine. I can't leave too big of an area unquilted because then the fabric will start to sag. But I do really enjoy putting a lot of texture in my work through heavy quilting. And that dimensionality with the wool batting, just, I don't know, it pleases me, and I hope other people enjoy it and appreciate it. But I do work both on my long arm machine quilting things, but I also hand quilt them as well. And the density of my quilting is even whether I'm doing it in hand quilting or in the machine quilting. And so I'm adding additional subtle lines with the quilting.
Yeah, I didn't know what a long arm was until I saw it in person. So
yeah, it's quite the education. And it is very nice to be able to quilt on the long arm because it is much more like drawing because you're moving the machine. Most people use the analogy of quilting on a domestic machine would be like having your pencil in a holder and having to move the paper underneath the pencil. Whereas the long arm, you're actually getting to move the pencil and the quilt or the paper is staying stationary. So it is much more like an actual drawing technique. And so it is, I think it's helpful to be able to do it in the process instead of having to reverse processes in your mind and having to move that paper as well. Although I did that for a number of years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the same way, and I've embraced the digital area when doing a lot of the prints. I've got a 32-inch Wacom on here, which I'll bring stuff in, and in some cases work it on a computer. So because like in printmaking, you basically are working in reverse.
Right.
So, to have it digitally on the screen, you can kind of flop it as a sketch or a drawing, look at it and say, oh, okay, that's what it's going to look like when it's printed somewhat, and it gives you ability to move objects around and step backward and recapture what you had originally done if it doesn't look aesthetically interesting, So there's, I think there's emerging of those technologies in printmaking as well,
I was going to say, and to me, that's one of the hard things about printmaking is being able to do that reverse in your mind of what's actually going to show up when you print something, because you have to be able to think about the reverse image of it.
Yeah, and for some of us, we're a little, I would say, not dyslexic, but it's kind of hard to think in terms of reverse unless you're doing it on a daily basis. And it's like, and to keep it in mind when you're designing it, so that with the prints, it's obviously everything is on the surface. Now you're working in textiles. Do you worry about what's happening on the other side of the quilted panel, or does that come into play at all?
It definitely comes into play with me. I know for some people, it's not a big deal what happens on the back because they consider their work artwork and you don't look at the back of a painting. But when you're talking about textiles and being a certified quilt judge, the tension of your stitches is very much a determinant about the longevity of the piece. If your stitches are too loose and the thread is not against the surface, you don't have a good tension in that stitch, the piece isn't going to hold up in time. And so it's going to fall apart. The quality isn't as good if you don't have good tension. So I am definitely checking my tension as I'm going. I have a couple guides that help me. Before I even start, I make sure that my machine is threaded properly. I test it out before I start working on the piece. But I also have something called a Tawa bobbin tension guide. So I put the bobbin in that and test the tension of the thread coming out of the bobbin of the sewing machine so that I know that it will balance with what the tension is on the top of the machine. And so those things help. It still's not always perfect because sewing machines aren't perfect. You can get a little piece of lint in there and suddenly you've got a little bobble in your tension, but it is definitely something that I keep in mind. And even with hand quilting, you have to be aware of how tautly you're pulling your thread. Are you causing gathers or pleats or any of that kind of thing? So it all adds into the quality of your work and your final product. The look of
I could see that maybe that, is there a point when you decided, maybe I'm dealing with something here where I really need to do a running stitch by hand versus a machine? It's going to take me longer. You have to make that decision. And
for me, it's typically more the look that I'm trying to accomplish, or the piece that's on the wall behind me is, I think 7 foot by 7 foot. I wasn't going to hand quilt that, but I have a piece on the table that's about 40 by 24, and that I hand quilted, just because I wanted the look of the stitch to be different. And there are certain patterns that are easier to do by hand than they are by machine. And so by doing some things by hand, I'm able to do a little bit different of techniques or looks to the work. So, and when I'm doing work for other people, I guess I would say, or other things, it depends on whether I want, is it something of value that I will put my time into by doing it by hand. In my traditional quilting, if it was just a class piece or a practice piece, I was going to machine quilt it. But if it was something that was show quality, then I wanted to hand quilt it because I wanted to put that extra effort into having it be viewed as a higher quality. I don't necessarily think that there's a difference in value. It's more a difference of look now between machine quilting and hand quilting.
I see. Yeah. Well, I was fortunate to inherit a number of family heirlooms from my grandmother who did crazy quilts, but also from my great grandmother who's at log cabin and star quilts, and they're all up there. And I hate to put them out anywhere. They're just too nice. They've just got everything. They've got all that love written into them. Of course,
Right.
They were utilitarian. They weren't considered to be, in a lot of ways, fine art productions, but
Right.
a deep appreciation for the amount of man hours, for sure.
Yeah. All right. It looks like it's time for us to move into the rapid fire questions. So here we go. Clay or paint?
Geez. Well, clay, that would be fun,
Mhm.
but I doubt whether I will. So I started painting in grade school because I had a father who was an artist and a mother who was supportive. So I'm comfortable working with the tactile qualities of that, but I like acrylic oil painting and like working large when I do get into something that's like that.
Yeah, for me, it would be clay. I have a sister who's a potter. We like to make messes together. So I definitely choose clay. Okay, visit a gallery or visit a museum?
We got a wonderful museum here in Toledo, as well as
Mhm.
one in Detroit, of course, DAA.
Yeah,
The Toledo Museum has got some gorgeous works, and it's a
Yeah.
manageable size. So if you want a day trip to someplace and see a really nice museum, I really recommend it.
yeah, I like going to museums just because I'm a history junkie. So I kind of enjoy going to museums and seeing the historical things. Morning studio time or morning hike?
Every morning is a walk, but studio time is like whatever your energy will support,
Yeah. I'm not a morning person, so studio time is usually in the afternoons, and the morning hike would get my energy flowing. So that sounds good to me too. Sketching on paper or sketching digitally?
Both really. Paper allows you to capture that tactile response that you're looking for, and without having to be slowed by the computer. But like I said, this Wacom tablet is kind of like an extra arm. I use a lot of Adobe Creative Suite material like Photoshop and Illustrator, as well as Clip Art Studio and SketchUp. So they are essentially the development and transfer of ideas between the processes that I'm looking for. So it helps you get a frame of an idea in your mind and kind of work with it there. But
Okay. For me, it would probably be on paper just because I don't have the practice on a digital medium to really be good at it. So I'd probably be finding it more soothing and more productive to be on paper than trying to do it on the computer. Traditional materials or alternative materials?
Traditional, I would say, because life is too short and resources too few to risk mistakes, you know? So,
I'm with you on that, just because when I've tried alternative materials, I just, it never turns out the way I envisioned. So,
yeah, you can't
you know,
afford too many disasters, you know?
yeah, yeah. Sun or moon?
The galaxy, really. A few extremely fortunate in the sense that we're seeing the launch of that James Webb telescope observatory this winter. So I'm patiently waiting to see, I guess in June when they sync up the mirrors, they're going to be able to look back in time to the beginning of the universe. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. Music or podcast?
Renaissance music, the Sirius XM and the albums by the New Baltimore Consort, and along with Avid Brothers, Nickel Creek, and Tracy Chapman, you know, that's playing
Okay.
in the back.
I was gonna say, I'm definitely music too. I can't concentrate enough. If a podcast would take too much concentration away from what I'm working on, but music is just something that can be in the background for me, and I definitely enjoy dancing around my studio every so often. So
Yeah, you need to have something, or it gets to be much of an echo, you know.
yeah, yeah. Well, I am the youngest of 6 kids, and so my house growing up was always filled with noise and people talking, and being in a studio by myself, I need something in the background to make me feel comfortable. So I enjoy having the music in the background, and every so often dancing around kind of helps me stretch out, because standing at the long arm in a stationary position kind of gets tight, and you just need to stretch out a little bit.
Oh
So
yeah, I'm quilt making. I mean, you concentrate, you get kind of like
yep.
focused. I don't know.
And you got to do these every so often.
Yeah, I feel like, man, am I hunched over? I can't believe that. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, it was nice meeting you. I'm looking forward to being able to see more of the exhibit. I'm hoping, I'm not sure if I'll get down to it in Athens, but I'm hoping that more of it gets shown online. So
sure. Same here. I'm interested in what you're doing because I got into textile work by being a reenactor, you know, working in
okay.
Civil War reenact. So we would sew all our clothes, you know.
Yeah.
So you became really, you got to really to know the fabric and understand how things were made. That's in the historical context. So a little point of interest there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, very neat. That was great to listen in on. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot.
for joining us. This was a conversation with Craig Fisher and Sue Cortese, 2 artists featured in OH+5 Contemporary Art of Our Region. The exhibition is on view now through March 13th at the Dairy Barn Art Center, and you can find more information at dairybarn.org. Thank you.
Thank you.